Welcome back. Can I put something to you? I knew about this, but he's now written this. Judge L.B. Sachs,
Yes.
who could hardly be regarded as a conservative, but is particularly interested in art, has written a piece very recently in which he has suggested that one shouldn't destroy those statues, but one should actually reconfigure them. And he gives two examples of what he means. The first was that if you go to Trafalgar Square in London, the South Africa House, I don't know if you've seen, but there's a dreadful series of mosaics on the murals on the thing, which is Jan van Riebeeck and Lord Lowndes, and it's as if there was never a black person in South Africa or Africa at all. And the point that he makes is he said that when we became a democratic society, the question is what to do with that, because of our embassy, and should it be destroyed? And eventually what happened was that they commissioned artists to put a perspex right around it, which in a sense has the black indigenous population, right, inscribed on the perspex, so that if you look at it, in fact, it's totally transformed the vision of the murals. And he said what his argument is, and the second example he gives is the Old 14 prison in Johannesburg, which was a dreadful place where people, it was the place where the apartheid regime detained and repressed and tortured people. Now it's the Constitutional Court. So what he's trying to argue is there no place for taking these statues and reconfiguring them to show the triumph of our new democracy over these colonialists in public spaces?
Well, I mean, I have huge respect for Professor Sachs, and I do get what he says, actually. And I think he is dealing with a minutiae of what to do, tactics around how to represent or to engage with Rhodes' statue. I think at a strategic level, I think there is a convergence, at least amongst those who regard themselves as progressive and in large measure in the black community, that these statues are an abomination. I don't think anyone is saying that they must be destroyed, as it were. Putting them in the museum, as Mr. Shivhambu was saying, is the best possible way of preserving history, because he will continue to be studied.
What he's saying, I mean, I accept that, and all I'm trying to do is try to put up an alternative vision, which is not at all. I mean, if we start with the point that you do not want to commemorate these people, you do not want to glorify these people, what do you do with it? So one is to remove, two is to destroy. Of course, removing, putting in a museum. He says, instead of trying to obliterate our history, we need to honor those who had struggled for justice and transform the area by setting up a dialogue between the past and the present.
I'm not sure about that.
Why not?
I'm not sure. One of the major points I'd put across is that universities are critical fountains of knowledge. They teach critical thinking, engaging with political figures. I don't think it is the place of universities to be having political figures in their center courts. And Rhodes, as we know, was the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, was an imperialist, a colonialist, was a political figure. And you have to deal also with the fact that vast swathes of UCT are named after Rhodes and his friend Jameson, from Jameson Hall to Jameson Stairs to Jameson Shuttle. You have Smarts Hall. So it's dealing with minutiae to suggest a simple reconfiguration. You need a radical measure, which is to shift to the museum.
I'm going to ask all of you, how do you respond to this?
Two things. I think the first thing is that certainly the notion of layering the past is a key conservation principle, and it's embedded in international charters, and it's something that UNESCO and quite a leading international charter like the Borough Charter actually endorses. So to create conversation between objects and different values. When this whole debate erupted, the first thing I thought about was a conference that Wits held in the early 1990s, and it was called something like Myths and Monuments. And the poster had the Voortrekker monument, and some figures were pulling it down, and some were trying to keep it in place. And at the time, there was a huge debate, a national debate, around what to do with the monument. And one of the iconic images was Tokyo Sexwale opening the gates to the Floyd monument, and I think it was published in the Sunday Times. Fast forward 20 years later, and the Floyd monument is a Grade 1 National Heritage Site. Now, if people were uncomfortable with that, then surely submissions would have been made to the South African Heritage Resources agencies to say that that should not be the case. But it's now a Grade 1 site under a democratic dispensation.
So how do you respond to that?
Look, the one interesting aspect about South Africa is that the dominant narrative about the end of apartheid, well, as told by the ruling party, is that apartheid was defeated and everything else. And that is not entirely the case, because apartheid had expressions economically, it had expressions politically, it had expressions socially as well, the racism, the sexism, and all those aspects. Yes, the political apartheid might have been defeated, but the economic component of it and the social dominance of apartheid has not been eroded. That is why not only in roads, not only in parliament, not only in the church square in Pretoria, but the whole of South Africa is still awash with colonial names and statues which tend to celebrate and commemorate our colonial and apartheid past. And that is because of a cowardized government and ruling party which has not fully won the political debate.
Well, not only for the purpose of debate. I accept readily, I'm not even going to waste time saying that's wrong. You're manifestly correct. So let's just tick that box and say we all agree.
Yes.
Right? Now the question arises, what do we do with those? Now, I know you say when you have a statute, it commemorates and it celebrates, oh, he was a great person. After all, they're unlikely, they may have a statue of you, but they're certainly not going to have one of me in the future, right? So what I'm trying to say is, most of us don't get statues because you're supposed to have done something big deal. But what I think Sachs and others are arguing is, this is part of our history. Can't we imaginatively confront people with the triumph of something over something else? And that therefore, instead of destroying it, you retransform it, you transform it. Transformation isn't destruction, it's reconfiguration. That's what he's saying.
Well, I mean,
so if you go, for example, to South Africa House, what you get, as he says, is the viewer is now compelled to look and interpret the murals with present-day eyes and sensibility. A visually arresting and historically powerful new work has emerged based on the transformation of the old.
Just quickly, well, I think the example of South Africa House in Trafalgar Square is a different one, because we can argue that the British, and they still celebrate their colonial status of South Africa. You check how the political leadership relates with Britain, with the Queen and everything else. Like, there's never been the colonial status, so they can still celebrate
Floyd, I understand that,
in terms
but I
of
want
what
to
had
put,
happened.
look,
there doesn't have to be reconfiguration. It should be relocation from public spaces to the museum.
Okay, all right. I'm going to come back to. I want to press you on that, but I've got to take a. Sorry, I've got to take a break.
Okay.
Once we're done with the break, we can come back and debate this further.